Today we're going to be taking a look at the latest HIYA Toys release. This is the Skullcrawler from Godzilla vs. Kong 2021, Skullcrawler 2.0, Skull Devil number 10, whatever you want to call them. Let's get it open and take a look. I'd like to give a huge shout out and thank you to INS Hobby for sending along this review sample. If you like what you see here, or if you like any other HIYA Toys products, you can check out my link in the link tree in the description. INS Hobby gets their stock the same day that it releases domestically in China, so if you want to order from them and get your figures about 2 to 3 months before domestic retailers like Big Bad Toy Store and Entertainment Earth, you can use my link in the description down below to secure your copy. INS Hobby offers a 30% deposit on pre-orders, or if you pay the full thing up front, you get a little discount as a thank you. Thank you again to INS Hobby for sending this along. And here we have the packaging for the Skullcrawler from Godzilla vs. Kong 2021. And I actually like this package a lot more than the original Skull Devil or Skullcrawler package. There's just a little bit more character to it. It's not really focused on the branding. You can already see from the get-go some of the changes and improvements that you might expect from that first figure here in this release, and I think that's just about all we have to say about the packaging, so let's get this guy out of the box and take a look. And here we have the Skullcrawler opened up and out of the packaging. Now, first impressions, there is a little bit of a different sheen, a different finish to the figure as compared to the previous one, which I'll bring out in just a moment. The articulation cuts are a little bit different in the neck and the head, which allow for a higher degree of movement. The mouth has been redesigned to not break because it's no longer made of a fragile rubber material, and the tongue is now interchangeable. So let's get in and take a closer look. As I mentioned, the figure does now have a little bit of a shinier, glossier finish to it. This is not unlike the finishes we've seen on some of the Super 7 Ultimates figures, and like the finishes on the Ultimates figures, the sheen here, it doesn't really bother me all that much. Where the previous Skullcrawler had a very consistent deco all throughout the body, you can see there's really nice red paint application along the spine that fades into more of a yellow as it travels down. Up toward the head, the color really pops. It looks very vibrant in person. It looks really, really nice. In the previous release, the color was rather consistent as you traveled down the arm. The top and the bottom of the foot were relatively similar, but even here you can see that they've gone and painted the underside a different color. And as we take a look at the underside of the figure, he looks much more fleshy. Like, this feels very Geiger-like, almost like a xenomorph or alien type creature. And this might actually be a good time to bring out the old version, just to get a side-by-side comparison. The figure on the left, the old Skullcrawler, I feel as though this is very much a nicely sculpted action figure. Like, it feels like an action figure that is meant to look like something that is on screen. Whereas this guy actually feels and looks like a creature that is like slithery and slimy, and just, it has a very different presence on the shelf. I've really been wrestling with which finish I prefer and which paint deco I prefer, and I do think that they both offer something unique. If you already have this guy, this one is going to offer something a little bit different in its painted features and its final texture that you're not going to get with this other one. Now, an important thing to note, when I got my copy, the mouth was actually painted shut. I think whatever they used to seal the paint on this figure, it just ended up kind of sealing the mouth shut, so it took a little bit of prying, but now you can see the actual mouth is totally fine. I just very gently eased it open. Taking a look in the mouth, you can actually see that they've replaced the rubber mechanism with something plastic. It functions virtually identical to the old figure. However, because there is no longer a rubber membrane that ties the two together, it does not force itself closed like this one did. And in fact, here's where we get to the one accessory that this figure comes with, and that is an interchangeable tongue. So if you get in there, you can get close to the base of the tongue. It's on a ball joint. You can just pop that out. I was really worried about the fragility of this peg, but it does seem rather robust. You can take this longer tongue piece and you just pop it in. It might take a little bit of doing, but with enough effort, there you go. He's got a posable, flexible tongue that you can sort of you can have him mindlessly rush toward whatever prey is in his sight. If you do not have the previous Skull Devil figure, let's take a look at the articulation. So the whole tail is on a thick, bendy wire. You can get that into whatever pose you want. Do keep in mind that this material will degrade over time, however. You've got a couple of ball-jointed segments there. You can wiggle about that much side to side, about that much up and down. The arms swivel the whole way around, in, out, You've got a double hinge elbow, wrist rotates, moves up and down. And here in the neck is where this release is actually different than the previous release. There is an additional cut here that allows for a wide range of movement. So he can look about that far up. He can look down quite a lot, which is nice. He can move about that far to the side, that far to the side. And I gotta say, this is a huge improvement over the articulation in the neck of the previous figure. When we take a look here, how far can he look up? About that far. How far can he look down? That far. Like almost not far at all. In terms of sideway movement, it is comparable, but really it's that downward motion that you're going to get in this new release that you could not get into that previous release, which is really nice to see, because in the times that we've seen the Skullcrawlers, there are quite a few iconic scenes where they are looking down like that at another character. And so the fact that the previous one couldn't do that, it's really nice that we're able to finally get that here with this release. As we take a look here at the inner jaw mechanisms, I do have to say that I prefer how this one looks, but I prefer how this one functions. This one, if I open the jaw, it sort of retracts due to that tension, and once that rubber breaks in there, it's broken for good. It will effectively ruin the toy. Here, they've prioritized function over form, which I do appreciate, and overall I do feel like this is an improvement over the solicitation images, which did feature that old membrane mechanism. Here's just another comparison shot of the textures of the figure, the finishes, and how the color schemes have changed between releases. As I mentioned before, this one feels like a fine sculpted figure. This one feels much more like there's an actual creature on my shelf. I know of at least a few folks who picked up multiple copies of this release here. They wanted to army build their Skullcrawlers. And I gotta say, and while I do think that this is a great release and looks great on the shelf, I do find myself having more fun fidgeting with this one. Just the increased movement, the texture, the paint applications. I just think that this is a more fun release than this one. I think that this one is still a really great release. If you have it, that's great. This one, I just find myself fiddling with a lot more, and I'm not actually afraid to use the jaw mechanism. I'm not worried about it breaking. Ugh, every time I see this underside, it just, it looks really fleshy. Overall, I'm very happy with this figure, and I think it's a great example of HIYA taking a figure that was already a really solid release and going even further with the articulation improvements and the addition of an accessory to make this release that much better than its predecessor. Now, some of you out there might be thinking that you really like the improved articulation and the inclusion of an accessory with this release, but you prefer the color scheme of that first Skullcrawler. It does appear that HIYA Toys will be reissuing basically every figure they've done in the line up to this point. Personally, I think reissuing the Godzilla vs. Kong just moments before the GXK Kong is a little bit crazy, but this reissuing does include that first Skullcrawler from Kong Skull Island, and we don't have confirmation at this time, but I think it stands to reason that reissuing that Skullcrawler will use this articulation scheme. If they know that the mouth membrane on the old one breaks and is no longer that functional, I think that they'll use this mold. We'll just have to wait for more details. Fingers crossed if you are hoping for the new mold in that old color scheme, but in the meantime, I do think that this figure offers something that the previous version does not. If you were worried about that mouth membrane and it kept you from sort of playing and enjoying the figure, I think that this figure is a much needed improvement over that other one, while the paint scheme and the finish of that old one still adds a different value to your shelf. I myself have been fidgeting with this thing all day. I like it a lot more for the playability aspect, and I'm glad to have it in my collection. Thanks again to INS Hobby for sending this along. I'm very happy with this release. If you want to pick this one up, pick up any other HIYA Toys figure, check out my link in the link tree down below. That's going to be it for me, but I'm curious to hear from you. Will you be picking up this HIYA Toys release? Are you hoping for this mold in those old colors? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care of yourself. I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.